Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the David F. Haas podcast, episode 139. I'm solo here out at Lungo Vita. We're going to do some filming for our upcoming fall special and corporate retreats that we're launching. So I figured, hey, I'll just record the podcast out here at Lungo Vita, change up the setting a little bit, give you guys something a little bit different to look at. But essentially, today's podcast is about how to heal your relationship with mom. I mean, but this could also really be how to heal your relationship with your parents. The issue with the people closest to us is that they are the ones that know exactly how to push the buttons in us. And so, all of the work that I do, I have this recognition that pretty much none of my family is ever going to listen to anything that I teach. And so part of the understanding that is required to heal those relationships is the understanding that you're probably never going to get anybody to see it the way that you see it. And the cornerstone of my coaching is that it's never about what's going on out there. It's always about what's happening in here. So the first, awareness that we have to realize is that we don't need mom or dad to change in order for us to heal. And that's ultimately a lot of times when people come to me in coaching, they are coming to me hoping that I can help them help the people that are hurting them see that they're hurting them so that their behavior stops. But that I can't do that because, well, one, they're not my client, but two is like we can't focus on things that are outside of us that are out of our control. The only person we can focus on is us. So when we recognize that, we move to this place of like acceptance that mom or dad don't have to change. I have to change how I'm responding to the way that they're treating me. And so that seems kind of shitty because ultimately what we want is for them to see things the way we see them. And we would hope that would make them change. But the reality is that we are the ones that have to begin doing the change. So I guess step one is we have to take responsibility for the fact that we are the ones that have to change. And while we would love for mom or dad to change, it's probably not going to happen. Especially if we are wanting them to change, because they are going to pick up on our desire for them to be somebody different, and they will naturally go in the opposite direction. So this looks like, if a boy likes a girl and he chases the girl and he wants her, he buys her flowers, he asks her to the movies, and she just wants nothing to do with him. Well, finally, the boy gets to a point where he says, "Wow, forget about it. I'm done with the girl." Then what happens? The girl ends up coming running. And the reason is because she can sense that desire and that wantingness, and naturally she doesn't want to give into that. And that's exactly what we're doing when we want somebody in our family to change. They will unconsciously go in the opposite direction. So we have to look at, well, why do we want them to change? Well, we want them to change because they're hurting us, for lack of a better term. And so what we want to look at is how they're hurting us and what button is it that they're pushing in us. But before we get to that, we're going to go to step one in this process, which is I guess it would be step two, because step one is recognizing that we have to let go of wanting them to change. So once we do that, we can move to step two, which is to have an understanding and acceptance for why they are the way they are. So, I put a post out on my social media and said, what's the problems with your parents? What's the problem with your mom? And I got a bunch of messages, which I'm going to go through some of these at the end of the podcast. But ultimately, what most people are doing is they're taking the action of their parent that is hurting them personally. And I know lots of people say, well, it is personal. She's actually attacking me, or whatever that may be. But the reality of the situation is that mom or dad is only exhibiting a behavior that is hurting you out of their own defense. So what example could I give? So for example, I have one client that said his mother-in-law is only happy when her kids are struggling, right? And why would someone want their children to struggle, right? And so right in that recognition is, first we have to identify the belief that the only way she loves her children is that if they're struggling. Well, that's a belief, and now we're looking through the lens of that belief. The second thing is that if she is trying to pull her children down, then that means that she is unconsciously trying to lift herself up. So in this scenario, what we were basically looking at is that she only feels needed when her kids are struggling. So unconsciously, she is pulling her kids down so that she can feel needed and wanted and important, let's say. And she has done so through this unconscious mechanism of, let's say, like belittling her children, right? Or making her kids second guess their decisions so that they need her. And so then when you really hear that, it's like, okay, yeah, well, big deal. It's like, that's what she's doing. But the reason that we don't really identify with and accept that behavior is because we're not actually empathizing with why he or she has become that way. And so if you think about somebody that is suffering so badly that they need to pull the people down that are closest to them and that they love the most in order to feel any ounce of importance, right? You can begin to connect to how much that person is hurting. And even as I say that, I know you're not connecting to it still. So I have to take it even deeper, right? And so what you have to visualize is your mother or your father as a kid. And you don't even have to know what it is that they went through. You can basically have an intuition of the fact that, for example, in this case, we didn't know that she probably wasn't like very popular growing up in school. She didn't have a lot of friends. She probably went through a lot of rejection where, her friends, the friends in the school invited everybody except for her to a party. This kind of stuff is the stuff that happened. And while you say, yeah, big deal, we've all gone through struggles, it's like if you went back to your 9-year-old mother or your 9-year-old father and you said to that little boy or girl when they were in the midst of whatever pain that it was that developed this mechanism to protect, if you said, how are you feeling right now? They would be devastated. They would be in such pain. And if you have your own kids, this is a great way to connect to that pain because you can sense how much they're hurting. And when you begin to feel what they are feeling, you are then empathizing. You are then understanding how much hurt they're actually in. We don't want to have sympathy. We don't want to feel bad for them. We want to feel with them. And when we really, truly can connect to how sad or lonely or whatever it was that they went through, if you could really connect to that pain by relating it to your own pain, relating it to your children's pain, you're then going to have an understanding of why they developed this unconscious pattern of trying to pull other people down in order to feel like they're needed and loved, right? And so when you see that, you move to this level of understanding that mom or dad isn't intentionally trying to hurt me. This is just the mechanism that they have unconsciously created to protect them from whatever pain it is that they went through in their lives. And so you will only really move to that level of understanding if you empathize, if you feel with them, if you really connect to how badly they are hurting, then you will easily see how their mechanism of protection was created. So that's step 2, is to recognize and understand that the thing that they are doing that is hurting you is only something that they put in place to protect themselves from being hurt. And you're saying, well, why can't they see that? Well, it's because everything that happened from the ages of pretty much 0 to 12, we unconsciously created programs to protect ourselves from re-experiencing that pain. And so without ever having any conscious awareness to look within, to become aware that I'm hurting my daughter, and to have the level of consciousness to say, well, why am I doing this and how can I change? If without that, they're basically going to remain stuck. And this is where most people, stay their whole entire lives. They stay at one level of consciousness. They may create subtle little leaps in awareness, but it's nothing compared to a spiritual student who is dedicated to looking within and actually transcending all of the limitations that the ego or the mind has created to protect them. So you can see how far apart those two levels of understanding and consciousness are. And so then we have to have acceptance for the fact that our parents are essentially just unconscious. They're unaware of the automatic mechanisms that are in place to protect them. And so then you might be saying, and I'm just intuitively picking up on what you guys are thinking as I'm recording this podcast, is, well, why can't I just make them aware, right? But it's like, we can't make anybody aware of anything until they have the intention to become aware. So it'd be like me speaking Chinese to you right now. It would all just go in one ear out the other. But if you had the intention to learn how to speak Chinese, right, you would be inquisitive. You'd be like, well, what does that word mean? What does that word mean? Right? So it's all about the intention. And so until they have the intention to heal and change, then nothing is ever going to change from them. They're going to remain unconscious. So we can let go of our wanting them to change. We can move to this place of empathy for why they are the way they are. We can then move to a place of understanding, which will then allow us to not take what they're doing to us, right, so personally, because that's what we've all done. When mom or dad is putting us down or is judging us or whatever, we are thinking that they are personally attacking us. But the reality of the situation is this is just an unconscious mechanism that they've put into place to protect themselves from their own pain. And if you really connect to that pain that they're feeling, you are going to move to this place of love and understanding for them. Okay? So that's the first kind of 3 steps. The last step is to identify the button, right? To identify what it is they're saying beyond what it is they're saying. And our family members, the people that are closest to us, are like experts. They're marksmen at pushing our button. They know exactly how to get right to it. And so if we look at the scenario of that I gave you with the example of the mother bringing down the daughter, it's like, what is the pain that is being caused when mother is, saying you're not good enough, is judging you for your actions or the way you're raising your kids or whatever? What is she really, or what are you really hearing there? And for most people, it's going to be that you're not good enough, that you're a bad mother, which would probably be a big button, I would say. You're going to fail, okay? And so if we can identify what it is, what button it is that she or he is pressing, then we can begin going to work to heal from the pain of that button ever being pressed again. So I have this thing in my coaching where I want to make the people that come to me in my coaching and in my groups and come out to retreats at Lungo Vita, I want to get them to a place where they're unfuckwithable, meaning there is nothing out there, including your mother, that can affect you. And so how do we get to that spot? Well, we look at all of the things that are affecting us and we understand what button is being pushed. So let's just say, for example, it's the button of not good enough, right? If your mom says, your house isn't very clean, like how you live like this, right? And so immediately you move into anger. That's your first thing. And you tell her to fuck off or whatever it is that you do. We have to recognize that the anger is a shield. It's anytime anger comes up, we can just visualize it as a shield. And that shield is protecting us from the button that's behind that shield, which is the feeling of not being good enough, right? And so once you identify that, oh, this is all a defense around the pain of not being good enough, you can ask yourself, can I handle the pain of not good enough? And 90% of the time, the answer is, yeah, I'm okay with feeling not good enough. And I understand why mom is doing that, because she doesn't feel good enough about herself. So she's trying to knock me down in order to lift herself up. And then you go to like, wow, that's just like sad. She must really be hurting. And the button becomes deactivated. So when she says, your house isn't clean, right? You can lean into the fact that, this is just the feeling of not good enough. Can I handle not good enough? Yeah, I can handle it. Now, if the answer is no, and that anger response continues to come up, she is still able to push the button in you, then you have to move into a deeper letting go or release of whatever it is that you've been holding on to. So let's just stick in the not good enough example. So in the not good enough example, if you bring awareness to the anger, she says your house is dirty. You bring awareness, you see, oh, this is a shield. You go beyond the shield and you're like, oh, this is just the pain of not good enough. And you're then in that, you're like, no, I'm okay and not good enough. But if every time she says something, whenever she walks into your house, the shield goes up and you have to continue to stay in this process of catching it, noticing it, and the button is still active, then we have to move into deeper mechanisms of letting go, which is to connect to the original incident. Like, where is it in your life where you experience the most extreme pain of not good enough, right? Where you experience the most extreme pain of failure, where you experience the most extreme pain of not being pretty enough, right? And if you can And as I'm saying this, most of you listening to this podcast are going back to those moments in your life where you felt like a loser. You felt like no one loved you. You felt like you were all alone, right? And so you're going to those moments. And now those moments may not be where it all began, but they are a great, point on the path to getting to that one moment of truly letting go. Now, the good news is let's just say you come up with a moment in your life where, let's just see, like one of mine was like being the smelly kid, which I've talked about a lot on this podcast. And so that was one of the moments where I recognized the shame and the embarrassment of that moment was so intense, right, that I immediately developed the mechanism of doing more, being more, so that I would never re-experience that pain ever again. And so that was like kind of one dot on the path to a deeper letting go of all underlying shame, okay? And so as I connected to that shame and sat in it completely, sat in the feeling of that shame completely, I basically took a bite of the apple of shame, right? And so the idea is to keep taking bites of this apple through incident after incident after incident until the apple is completely gone. And then when someone tries to push the button of not good enough or you're going to fail or whatever it is in you, there is no more button to push. You've eaten the apple, right? And so people are going to say, well, how do I feel that pain? Well, the mechanism of letting go is about truly connecting to the pain and identifying how that pain feels in the body, because emotions are just that. They're feelings. They're felt in the body. The reason that emotions become so overwhelming, essentially, to the point where we don't even want to be in the same house as our mother, is because we have resisted feeling it. We have resisted that button being fully pushed. And people are going to say, oh, I felt it. Well, what most people have done is they felt a little bit of it. They've tried to rationalize it or fix it or solve it or get out of it. And that resistance to fully leaning into the pain is the thing that perpetuates the pain. And this is better understood in an example. It's like, if there is a person who is fearful of heights, their mind will be flooded with endless avoidances of heights. They won't fly in planes. They won't climb stairs. They won't go in elevators. They won't climb ladders. They just are constantly, obsessed with not getting into high situations. And in fact, if someone says, come on, why don't you just get in a plane? They'll probably get defensive and they'll probably say, no, fuck you. You don't understand how terrible this fear is. And they'll go into, and they may not be friends with you anymore because you suggested that, right? And so all of this suffering is out of the avoidance of actually climbing up a ladder, identifying how you feel once you're up on that ladder, which is going to be elevated heart rate, shaky, dizzy, lightheaded, exaggerated breathing, weakness throughout all of your muscles. And then you just say, okay, here's all of the feeling of fear of heights. Let me just stay here. And you just stay in it. You focus all of your attention on it. You don't try and think your way out of it. You just, every time you catch the mind saying, hey, it's time to get down or whatever, you just ignore it and you lean completely into the physical sensation and actually the energy of the emotion that is coursing through your entire body. And if you stay there long enough and you stay with that energy, what you're going to find is in the first 10 or 15 seconds when you say, give it all to me, I want all of this pain, I want all the pain of not good enough, I want all the pain of failure, give it all to me, it's going to get worse. There's going to be a moment of like I can't handle this, but you just have to have the courage and faith that you can, and then lean in. And then really quickly, that emotion will begin reducing. It actually reduces so quickly that you begin immediately questioning the mechanism of letting go. You say, like, this can't be it. Like, this can't be the thing I've been avoiding my whole entire life, right? And so then as you stay there, the emotion begins to reduce more and more. And now here's the other thing that most people will make a mistake on, is as the emotion gets down to like a 2 or a 3, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, at the beginning it's a 10. When it gets down to a 2 or 3, most people think they're done because their body and everything is just so at ease and they feel confident and courageous. But the goal is to like make sure it's completely gone and just stay with it as long as you possibly can until it gets all the way down to a 0. Now, this mechanism may have to continue to be repeated if the button still gets pushed. But you'll know when you're truly healed from it when mom or dad says that thing that always used to send you off the deep end, and you actually just laugh about it. And you can actually just empathize with your mom and be like, I understand exactly why you're doing that. And yeah, while that hurts, while that once hurt, it no longer affects me, right? And I just love you for who you are, right? Now, what will happen from this as a natural consequence of the resistance that's been happening between you and your mother or father is you are like, the two of you are like this, and you are just going to take a step back, right? Which is naturally going to have to allow them to take the step back because there's no longer force being met with force. And because of that, they will get pulled up with you. Now, you can't go into any of this with the intention that I'm doing this to change them. It all has to be about your own personal healing. But a consequence of you changing will be them changing, believe it or not, right? When you are no longer bothered by them calling you a failure, by them calling you a bad mother, or them calling you or them judging you, when it just doesn't actually bother you anymore, right? They will naturally shift. It's pretty much inevitable, okay? And so the last thing that I'll say before we move into the questions is there is also an element of discernment. And when people hear me say things about like acceptance and understanding, they say, you can have an understanding, but it's like you have to have boundaries as well. And so yes, acceptance and understanding isn't allowing people to walk all over you, right? And so it's like, I guess the way I describe acceptance and understanding is I can have acceptance and understanding for a lion if he was out here eating a zebra, right? But I'm not going to allow that lion into my house, not because I hate the lion, right? Not because I'm judging the lion, just because that's the boundary that I've created, right? Because I don't want my family or myself to be injured, right? And so there is this element of boundaries, but it has to be from this place of complete and total forgiveness and understanding, right? And so if you're setting boundaries from this place of resentment and anger and essentially like, fuck you, you're not coming to my house anymore, then it's going to continue to be a problem. But if a boundary is set, for example, as mom judges and it no longer pushes a button in you, do you really need a boundary around that anymore? No, you actually just laugh about it. And if you continue to laugh about it, she is naturally going to shift. Now, if she's insulting or she's being mean to your children or whatever, then there's the line, right? There's the line where you say, hey, listen, I understand where that's coming from, but I just don't, I'm not going to allow you to speak like that to me in my house. And if she goes off the deep end and goes crazy and that pushes a button in you, right? Then that's the next button that we have to work on, right? Is how you feel bad about hurting her feelings, okay? So you can see how like this is like a letting go of the first button is literally the first step, because as that button is deactivated, you're going to realize that there's about 10 other buttons, right? But this is the process of spiritual growth, and the pathway to enlightenment is to understand the things that are out there that are affecting us and then turn them inward and say, well, why is that affecting me? What button is being pushed in me? And if you can make that shift and you can link that shift inward, then there is going to be no one or no thing that can ever press any button in you ever again. And that is essentially enlightenment. And so that is a lifelong process. So let me shift to some of the questions. I just kind of like wrote out them so I didn't have to pull up my phone. My logical mind has solved the issue of mother. Like she has logically forgiven and understands why her mother is the way she is, but my physical body is still responding to the pain when she's around her. So she says basically when she's in the presence of her mother, she actually feels like it's an energy suck. And we've all experienced this. We can be around someone that lifts us up and we can walk into the room, we can feel that energy, and we can be around someone that drags us down and we can feel that energy as well. So what she's talking about is recognizing that the body is still responding to the pain that her mother caused, right? And so this happens all the time in like spiritual growth. People will understand a concept. They understand that they have to, they'll understand why their dad is the way they are, right? And why he continues to insult you over and over again. They understand that. And they've even kind of like let it go, but they've actually never tuned into the pain and felt the pain in the body. So it's like the logical mind can see it. but it's like the movie that's playing behind the curtain is a completely different movie. So it's like, oh yeah, I forgive this person, but I'm never allowing them into my life again, right? And it's like, well, it's like maybe you haven't truly fully forgiven, right? It's almost like the logical mind is trying to say, I get it all, I'm a better person, but the body and what's happening at the subconscious level, what I'm picking up on from this one is that the body is still in a sense of fight or flight when it comes to mother, right? The body still is in a complete state of fear of how your mother can hurt you, right? And so in order to break free from this is we have to get actually out of the logical mind, and we have to tune into the physical body, and we have to lean into that stress response, right? So whenever you experience the most amount of fear, I'm just going with fear on this one, around your mother, right? Whatever that climax was where she made you feel the worst about yourself that you've ever felt, you have to tune into how that felt in the body, right? And then you have to stay with the body sensation until it burns out. What's happening right now is that the mind doesn't trust the body to fully feel that emotion because it believes that if it feels that emotion completely, it's going to die. The mind, you are going to die, right? And so now with that logical mind, we can then say, I'm not going to die, and I am fully willing to feel this pain completely. As you lean into that pain, you're going to lean into all those sensations. You're going to lean into the fatigue that you're feeling in the cells of your body. And then you're going to stay there as opposed to resisting it. And once you stay there long enough, right, the body is finally going to relax. It's like, I can sense it. It's like you're like tense when you're around her. There's unconscious tension that's around her. Logically, you're saying you're fine, but the body is going, we're not fine. We're not safe here, right? And so the body believing it's not safe is a connection to the deep, deep pain or fear that you're still holding on to at an unconscious level. That is what has to be released in order for you to be around your mother and not have that draining response anymore. Mother Teresa was a perfect example of this. She could be around the worst of the worst, the criminals, the people that were dying of disease, and it would have no effect on her, right? Because she had become unfuckwithable, right? So there's no energy of anybody out there that could affect her. Her energy was only lifting other people up, and that's where we want to shift to as well. Another one was, what if you don't want to? What if you don't want to forgive your mother? What if you don't want to heal the relationship? And so the only question I would ask you is, why not? Like, what is it that your mother did that was so bad that you never want to heal that relationship? And so this doesn't mean that you have to have a relationship with your mother, right? It's like, maybe she's just a very evil person and you just don't want to be around her. Like I have a similar situation like with that in my family. It's like, I love this person, but I'm not going to allow them to be around my children because I would actually be scared of what might happen, right? And so if that's the situation, that's fine, but not wanting to forgive or rekindle the relationship with mother is probably more so about she has hurt you so badly, right, that you want to hurt her back by never allowing her back into your life. So that's anger. That's the shield, right? And so the first thing we have to do is we have to sit in the energy of anger. We have to sit in just how infuriated we are with her. And we have to allow that energy to run its course and pass. And then we have to say, okay, now that the shield has been put down by allowing ourselves to stay in it, then you have to say, well, what was that shield protecting me from, right? It's pain of not being loved, pain of not being good enough, pain of abandonment, whatever it may be. And then that's the next emotion that needs to be connected to and felt. Now, after you do all of this and you're completely, truly free of it, not just from a conscious mind saying, no, I'm free of all, I just don't want to have a relationship with mother, right? You have to really intuitively ask, do you want to feel the love that your mother has for you? And if the answer is no, then that's fine, right? But recognizing that we create karmic connections with people. So anything that is kind of like left unresolved, unforgiven, we are going to be tethered with that person throughout our whole entire lives, right? So if we can truly, fully forgive, then that tether may be broken, but it probably has to be spoken. And that's the thing. It's not so much about needing her to forgive you. It's about a recognition that allowing her to recognize that you forgive her, and also admitting and taking responsibility for how you wronged her as well. So it would go kind of both ways there, right? And so after all of that is done, if you still don't want that person in your life, then that's fine. But my guess is if you truly fully forgive, that person will naturally begin to come back into your life effortlessly. It won't have to be anything that is forced. I have this saying where you move effortlessly into uncomfortability. So having a difficult or uncomfortable situation, sure, you could just go and force your way in, but it will probably be met with a lot of resistance. If you've done the work on your own, you will just find yourself one day at the dinner table with your mother that you thought would never happen, having a conversation that you thought you would never have. That is moving effortlessly into uncomfortability. The third one is, how do I love her despite the treatment? How do I forgive myself for hating her, right? And so, I mean, we kind of already covered this one, but essentially recognizing that the hating her is the shield, right? You hate her so much because she was able to hurt you. So we have to be able to put the shield down first, and that is allowing ourselves to feel the rage and the anger that we have for her and to stay in it. So just think about how mad you are at your mother. Connect to how that feels in the body. It's going to be tightness in the chest. It's going to be flexing of the muscles. And then just stay in it. And when you're staying in the energy of anger, it's the energy of like wanting to punch a pillow, and so you can tune into that energy right now as you're listening to this podcast. You can tune into the energy of wanting to punch a pillow, but then it's like you don't punch a pillow. You don't release the energy. You stay with the energy. And in staying with the energy, it'll burn out. It's kind of like if I just told you to flex your muscles and hold them as long as you possibly could, eventually you're not going to be able to hold it anymore, and you're going to have to release. And that's kind of like what we're doing with anger, right? We're just staying with the anger. We're staying with the energy of the anger. We're keeping all of our focus on the physical sensation. And eventually that anger is going to burn out. And now when it burns out, right, the hate is going to be gone. And what is going to be revealed underneath that is how she hurt you, right? And then that pain is going to be real. And I'm like, whoever wrote this is like, I'm connecting to the pain that she caused you right now. And it's like, it's intense. It's like really, really painful. And so that pain will have to be leaned into and felt fully until we essentially become okay in that pain. It's just like the guy who's fearful of heights. When he's on the first rung of the ladder, he's sweating, he's like crying, he's shaking, and it's like he thinks he's going to die, right? But then eventually, if he stays there long enough, all of that goes away and he recognizes, oh, I'm okay on this rung of the ladder. Now I'll take another few steps, right? And so we have to learn how to be okay in the pain that we've been avoiding all of our lives. And one of the ways you've avoided it for this person is by hating her. It's defense. It's a way to not feel the pain she caused you, right? And so first we have to let go of our anger. And sometimes people don't want to let go of anger because we're getting so much from anger. We get to be right. We get the fuel of it. We get to talk about it at parties about how terrible our mother is and how we had to do it all on our own. And it becomes our story and our identity. And all of that has to be let go of if we're going to let go of the anger. So sometimes there's a lot of attachment, right? We're getting a payoff from holding on to certain emotions. And anger is one of the biggest payoffs there is because there's a lot of energy in anger, right? And so when you connect to that pain, right, and you use the other steps that I walked through about understanding and empathy, you are going to move to this place of forgiveness, right? And in that forgiveness, you may come back together, okay? And then the last one I have to read, because there was a couple things here, and I'll just pull it up. And then I just want to give you one example to kind of like leave you guys with. So this one is, how do I let go of childhood traumas caused by my mother, like emotional abuse, etc.? And then how do you get your mother to understand you don't hold a grudge due to childhood, but you need them to understand how their actions affect you and is now why you have certain boundaries with them. How to set boundaries without offending, essentially. So I've kind of already addressed this, but essentially the line here that I think is most important is, how do I get them to understand? There's nothing that we have to get them to understand. Right? And if we try and get them to understand anything, we are setting ourselves up for a massive failure, right? So this is an example of the conscious mind saying, I forgive, I've done the work and I forgive, but I don't want you to come back into my life and do this again because then I will feel hurt again. So what we want to do instead is identify all of the hurt that was caused. And then if that hurt shows up again, we're completely fine with it. We've done the work. We've sat in that hurt. We stood on the rung of the ladder, and we're okay. And so they can't hurt us anymore, right? And so through that, there will be no need for them to understand why we are the way they are. It's like it'll just be a consequence of who we become, and maybe there will be no understanding needed or no boundaries needed, because the reason that you had the boundary is because that person was able to push a button in you. But if there is hard line boundaries, like I said, if they insult your kids or are really mean in whatever ways, yes, there are boundaries. This spiritual growth is not about becoming a pushover, right? And so if there is a boundary, then if it hurts their feelings, which then makes you feel sad, that is the thing that needs to be leaned into, your own sadness, your own guilt for making them feel sad. But that is for them to process and move through. You just set the boundary from beyond your buttons, right? And the boundary beyond your buttons is just like anything that is like evil, hurtful, not from a place of love. Like this is when the boundaries are set. And so when we recognize that those boundaries are pretty simple, right? It's like, just be a good person when you're in my house. If you're not a good person, you're not going to be in my house anymore. That's the boundary, right? And so all the other boundaries, though, of like pushing the buttons in you, you're going to have done that work. And so you won't need as many boundaries as you once did, if that makes sense. And so we don't want to get them to understand anything. And if they do cross our boundary, which is the boundary of being a good person, we have to deal with how telling them about our boundary makes us feel because we hurt them, right? So that's basically how you sum it all up. And I guess the best way I can describe this which is something I talk about at my retreats and stuff out here at Lungo Vita, is like right out here, we're sitting, and you guys can't see it, but there's Lake Erie, and like Lake Erie, you can't even see all the way across it, right? It's this big giant lake. And so what I say to people is, I say at my retreats, I want you to get in the water and I want you to go swim across Lake Erie. And they all like just kind of laugh it off. And then I say, no, guys, I'm serious. I want you guys to get in the water. This is part of the retreat. I want you to swim across Lake Erie. And then they start saying, well, come on, no. And then I keep pushing, and then they get angry almost, right? And so what their mind is doing is protecting them from the threat of potential death, even though they know it's an exercise and it's a joke. I'm not going to make them swim across Lake Erie. If I push them long enough and hard enough, they will eventually begin to push back and get angry. They'll walk out. They'll get in their cars and they'll drive away. They'll put a report in and they'll tell the whole world about how terrible my retreats are. Like, they'll do all of these things, and it's all out of avoidance of potentially dying, right? And so Lake Erie is a metaphor for the pain that you've been avoiding your whole entire life, okay? And so you see your pain as difficult to cross or swim across as Lake Erie. You think you're going to die if you did it, right? And so the thing to recognize about emotions, all of these emotions that you've been avoiding your whole entire life, is that they look as long and as deep as Lake Erie, but once you finally have the courage to say, you know what, let me just jump in and see what this is all about, right? Let me just feel what it feels like to, let me just feel what I felt like when mom told me I would never, be successful, or when mom slapped me, or when mom locked me in my room, whatever it may be. Let me just feel what I felt, right? And you have the intention to get into the lake. The thing that you're going to recognize when you get into the lake is that the lake is only an inch deep. And that is the way all emotional pain is. Our mind, our ego, perceives all physical and emotional pain as potential death. And because of that, it will do everything in its power to make sure that we never re-feel that pain. We never go back there, because it believes if we go back there, we will die. But when we finally have courage, which is on the level of consciousness, is where we shift from force to flow. When we move to the level of courage to say, you know what? I'm okay with feeling sad. I'm okay with feeling alone. I'm okay with feeling abandoned. I'm okay with feeling the pain what I felt when I knew that my mom didn't love me, right? I'm okay there. I can handle it all, right? Then we just walk right across the lake. And then every time we're faced with an emotion and we're looking across the lake thinking we can't get in, we're going to know, no, we've done it. We've done it before. This may be a different instance or a different emotion, but we have the courage to step in, right? And every time I've gone to these emotions that I was like, I can never feel that, or I can never tell that story, or I can never let anyone else know about this. Every time I've stepped in, it's like almost like a recognition that like I can handle it. I'm okay. Like I can deal with this. And when you do that, you've deactivated the button. And if the button keeps showing up, that means you haven't deactivated it completely, and there's more work to be done. And so this is how you heal. This is how you heal the relationship with mom. It's nothing about what they need to do. It's all about what you need to do, which I know is not the answer that you were looking for. You were hoping that I was going to tell you how you could change your mother or your father, but that's not how it works. We have to change first. We have to be the change, and they will eventually follow. And even if they don't, we're okay, if that all makes sense. So I hope I explained that in great detail. Thank you to everybody who put those submissions in. I think it makes the podcast like a lot more real and relatable. So I'll continue to do stuff like this. But I hope that podcast was helpful. If you know anyone that would help, it would benefit from hearing this, just share it over to them. And don't forget to give a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for taking the time. We'll see you again next Sunday.